Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly masterclass series. We're delighted to have you joining from all over the world. So I myself am based in Switzerland right now, and it's 6 p.m., but I'm sure you're joining from all different time zones. So what we're doing today is actually looking through our M7 schools, specifically INSEAD and LBS, and we're taking a look into how these schools, how their culture is set up, as well as how the application process is. All of these schools in general from all our weekly sessions have received record-breaking applications in the last 12 months. So what we're looking to give you today is a bit of insights so that they can really help you with your journey with these schools. So I actually am fortunate enough to work with Fortuna, where we have a whole host of experts that have either worked at the schools, like you'll meet soon, Emma and Caroline, or that have attended the schools directly and still have a close bond. So within the next hour, we will specifically go through the schools that I've mentioned. But if you have any questions that we don't address, please feel free to reach out to us for a 30-minute consultation. We do a lot of deep diving into your CVs before we actually take the calls so that we can make sure to use that 30 minutes to the maximum potential. So let me start with introducing the team today. So you'll have Caroline on the line, and she is the former director of MBA Admissions and Financial Aid at INSEAD. And we also have Emma here that used to work at London Business School as a director and admissions consultant. Let me finalize by introducing quickly myself. So I used to attend INSEAD and have since kept very close contact with the school, and myself help applicants with their journeys throughout the application process. So Caroline, Emma, is there anything you want to add to introduce yourself before we jump in?
It's just really...
Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah. Sorry, Caroline, if you go.
Sorry about that. Well, just to add that I also did the program myself. So I'm an alum of INSEAD. I did the program in 2003 and then went back to the school as admissions director a couple of years later. And I'm very passionate about INSEAD and other international MBA programs. So thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you, Emma.
Yes, hi everyone. Thrilled to be here today. And yes, I have been working with Fortuna now for, gosh, I think it's about, I was trying to work out today, about 8 or 9 years as a director and consultant expert coach. But my background is admissions at London Business School and a couple of years at the Boston Consulting Group doing recruitment into their offices across Europe. So yeah, very pleased to be here today. And I'm not sure if my picture is showing up. Caroline, can you see me?
I can see you. Yeah.
I can see you as well.
I can't see myself, but that's probably a good thing.
You look great.
Perfect, both. Thank you so much for the introduction. So everyone, what we'll be doing today is we'll go through top questions that you have, and please obviously keep sending questions through. We'll try and have a bit of a Q&A at the end of the session, and we'll get both Emma and Caroline to address these. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to remind you of the next sessions that are coming up. So we have NYU, Stern, Duke, and Johnson Cornell on June the 22nd, which is the next one. And then we have Berkeley, UCLA, and Yale coming up on the 29th. You'll always be able to see the recordings of these sessions, just in case you can't attend, the 12 noon Eastern time. So starting with the discussion topics. So what is special about LBS?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. So I think it's such a broad topic. I was thinking about this in advance of the session, and I mean, I could talk pretty much all day about what I think is special about LBS, but the same way Caroline is very passionate about INSEAD, I'm very passionate about LBS. I think the first thing to probably mention is the location. So if any of you have been fortunate enough to visit the campus at Regent's Park in London pre-pandemic, it's a glorious campus. It is right on the edge of Regent's Park. Very historic, the Nash Terraces, but it has now some extraordinary new buildings which were opened about 3 or 4 years ago, which have really expanded the campus and given the school room to grow. The benefit, obviously, of being in London is the exposure that the school has to the city, to recruiters, to speakers. And, you know, in the sort of 7 years or so I spent on campus, there were an enormous number of very, very interesting speakers sort of visiting campus on a regular basis. So certainly the location is key. London being in sort of a central time zone. So for me here it's 5 p.m, but I can also do business in the US and in Latin America, but also in Asia earlier in the day. So when you are a student at the school, you do have that ability to sort of network across time zones very easily, because you can reach both East and West on the same day. So I think the access that the central London location provides to recruiters, the access to internships, you know, and just the visibility of the school being in a very large global capital like London, that's certainly, I guess, the first thing that jumps out. The second thing really is something that is probably also aligned very much with INSEAD, and that's the global nature of the program, the global nature of the community. And I know Caroline could also, you know, talk about this for ages with INSEAD. So LBS has a very, very diverse class, a very diverse community. So the admissions teams across the suite of programs that they have there are very much about recruiting students into the class from all different nationalities, all different cultures. So there is no, I guess, one dominant culture in the MBA class, for example. There are around about 60 to 70 nationalities each year that come in. David and the team there really do actively seek to keep that culture broad and to make sure that there is no, as I say, no dominant culture in the school. So that's something that, by virtue of the class that comes in, expands out to the rest of the experience. The program itself, the curriculum is extremely global. There are things like the global business experience trips, which now head out to places like Lima, to Tel Aviv, to China, to where, you know, there are different options every year. So that's really something that is quite specific to LBS, to INSEAD, and to, you know, to some of the European programs, and something very much that the school sells itself on. And I think the third thing that I wanted to touch on is probably this idea of cross-generational learning. So anybody who's actually had a look at the school and the suite of programs, many of you listening today might be looking at the MBA program, but the school also, as part of being quite dynamic and quite forward-thinking, has expanded its portfolio of programs greatly over the past sort of 10, 15 years. So there are a number of early career programs, the Masters in Management, the Masters in Financial Analysis, Masters in Analytics and Management, the finance programs, and then right through to the sort of senior experience programs like Sloan. So what that actually means for the experience of people on campus is that when you have an elective, you are learning alongside both people who are perhaps quite recently graduated from university, but also people who have right up to C-suite level experience. And I think that adds a really sort of specific flavour to the LBS classroom, and that's certainly something that students sort of look for and talk about when they're commenting on their LBS time.
And Emma, like, people come from all backgrounds, right? We have Eugene here that comes from a military and civil service background. And I think it would be great to, you know, for you to speak to that experience, right? LBS is not only consultants and, you know, with financial background candidates.
That's absolutely right. And, you know, traditionally, when I started at the school, which is a very long time ago now, it was recognised very much as a finance school. That was what it was famous for. It had the Masters in Finance program, which it still has. It was based in London's financial capital. And it was very much seen by people, you know, as a place to go to study finance. And over the years, it has very much kind of blossomed into a class that is representative of pretty much every single sector that you can think of. Interesting that we have someone from the military who's listening and watching. So LBS has a military scholarship, for example. They are very keen on people who come from military backgrounds, and some of the best candidates I saw come through the program when I was there came from that military background. You know, the leadership opportunities that people have who come through with that kind of experience really adds value to the program. They see people come from law backgrounds every year, and I've had a couple of clients from legal backgrounds. People come from health, obviously consulting, finance, sort of, and more and more over the past few years, sort of tech backgrounds, so people from product management, that kind of thing. And then of course there's entrepreneurs, so people who have family business backgrounds. So yeah, there's really, you know, in the same way that there's no dominant culture, there's no dominant industry, and that's one of the things that makes the experience there just such a dynamic, kind of interesting place to be.
Great, thanks, Emma. So moving on to, you know, our next question, how would you describe the culture at INSEAD, and who is a good fit? So Caroline, I'll pass this over to you.
Thank you, Bea. Yeah, so a lot of commonalities, as Emma said. There are a lot of commonalities between INSEAD and London Business School. So both incredibly diverse international communities, and you know, partly as a result of that diversity, very, very dynamic communities. So I think that you know, the classroom is very, very stimulating, and you know, the experience on campus, the social community, and then of course the alumni network. It's incredibly active and dynamic, and that is thanks to you know, the school's ability to attract people from across the world who are doing you know, pursuing a lot of different careers, and what they have in common is that they are ambitious. They're looking to you know, build really strong careers in whatever domain they're pursuing, and they have a true interest in being part of a very international community. So I think that's something that people have in common, both at INSEAD and London Business School. Something that is a bit more specific to INSEAD, I would say, is the incredible intensity of the program. So it is a one-year program. The pace is very fast. Some people describe it as, you know, drinking from a fire hose. So that's something that you need to be prepared for, and that's something that the school is looking for in their applicants. So are you someone who's prepared, who embraces that kind of intense experience? And will actively thrive in that, because it is not for everybody, right? Some people are better suited to a longer program where you've got a more measured pace. So definitely that's something to be aware of, is the intensity of the experience. I would say that something that a lot of INSEAD students and alumni have in common as well is the desire to have a positive impact. INSEAD students are very ambitious, very smart, but also, you know, they want to use their skills and their talents and their education to have a positive impact in the world. And if you can convey that in your application, then that will certainly help to show your alignment with INSEAD's values. And then, you know, a distinctive part of the INSEAD experience, of course, is the multi-campus structure. So you can choose to start either in Fontainebleau or Singapore. You can exchange between the campuses. There's also an opportunity to study on the campus in Abu Dhabi. Perhaps in the future, we'll be able to come to the San Francisco hub. I'm here in the Bay Area, and I'm delighted that the school has opened a center here, which they'll be using increasingly. And I believe that you know, they'll be running some electives where you can come over to this part of the world and discover Silicon Valley. So it's that multi-campus structure has also very much enhanced the exposure that you get at the school, and that incredible international diversity and that learning experience. So, and most of the students do take advantage of that. When I did the program, I had been working in Paris before I went to INSEAD, so I chose to start in Singapore and spent most of the year there, and then also went to Fontainebleau. And having that sort of multi-campus experience was wonderful. And there's really, the programs run in parallel. So you get the same education, the same access to incredible faculty, the same diversity of the student community, but you're just in a very different environment, right? So when you're in Singapore, you're in the heart of Southeast Asia, an incredibly fast-growing region. Singapore is a wonderful hub for traveling around Southeast Asia in normal times, of course, somewhat challenging during COVID, but otherwise it's, you know, a wonderful hub for learning about Southeast Asia and also other parts of Asia. Whereas in Fontainebleau, it's a beautiful town in the middle of a forest. You know, Paris is very accessible, but the program is so intense that most students don't actually get into Paris very often, but there's an incredible social life on campus, and there's a large student community, so there's always a lot happening. So very, very different environment. But you did the program, obviously, so anything that you would add from your experience about the culture at the school?
No, and you're absolutely right. So if I take my coach hat off and put my personal one on, I actually evaluated both schools and then decided to accept INSEAD. And that was exactly because I wanted that, you know, full immersive, you know, different campus experience with kind of these older candidates compared to US schools. So I completely agree that that's a choice. And, you know, putting back my coach hat on, this is a question that, you know, nearly every single client that we go through has that does want to apply to European schools. It's always that INSEAD versus LBS. And so at least from my standpoint, that's a lot where I spend time on, you know, what is the perfect fit for you? Also, because in at least my situation, it's been quite clear cut on who would fit one school better than the other. But one question I wanted to ask you both before we pass to the next topic. So we had an anonymous attendee that asked, you know, what if you don't have international experience? How would both of these schools react? So maybe just a quick answer from you both here on, you know, are LBS or INSEAD open to candidates that don't have that international background?
So
Go ahead, Emma.
I was just going to say, I'll jump in on that one. So it is true that both schools do look for international experience as part of their sort of applicant profile. So there is no doubt that if you have a widely international profile, it is an advantage. That said, I have yet to come across any client or any candidate that has no international experience. And it's all about how you perceive that word international. So no, you might not have, you know, been able to study abroad before or travel widely, or your job might not have enabled you to move around a lot. And particularly, you know, seeing that with people who have had plans to be traveling internationally the past couple of years, and that's been stymied. You know, jobs, I've got clients who were supposed to be on transfer or secondment, and they haven't been able to do that. But that said, the schools recognise that international experience comes in other forms. So you might be working in a multicultural team, you might be working or doing deals across borders, you might be managing people remotely, so in different geographical locations, you might be working with global clients, or you might have, you know, in your personal life had the advantage of being able to travel and experience different cultures that way. So there are different facets of international exposure, and I think that most people, if they dig deep, can find one or more of those within their own profile.
Yeah, and I agree with Emma. I mean, not everyone has the same opportunities to get a lot of international exposure pre-MBA. So emphasizing the exposure that you have had, even if it's from your own country, is helpful. And then also explaining your motivation. Why is it relevant for you to be part of a very international community? You know, how is that important to you? And emphasizing your motivation for learning from that type of community. So you can also make it, you know, more forward thinking.
Thanks, team. So now going to the next topic. So let's talk about professional experience. What is the right background? And I know we touched upon this a bit earlier, saying about the variety, but let's deep dive on this topic now on both schools.
Okay, so in terms of, you know, the right background, you can start with saying there is no right background as such. And, you know, LBS and also INSEAD, they actively seek to bring in classes which have a representative population across, you know, as broad an industry and sector profile as they possibly can. So I guess if you're wanting to pigeonhole things, you can look at the different sort of funnels of candidates that come in as perhaps career advancers. So people who are looking to move their career on, you know, in the same sector or even the same function, but just to progress, career changes. So people who come in and want to make a distinct shift, and then entrepreneurs. So people who have that business idea, whether or not they want to put it into practice directly after the program, or perhaps gain some wider experience and then perhaps look at setting up their own business a few years out. But certainly, you know, I sort of touched briefly on some of the industries where people come into the program. And you do still get people who come on what I would call a traditional track. So when I worked at BCG, you know, we had people coming in at sort of associate level who would then go off and do an MBA at one of the top schools and then come back and they would have moved up to consultant level. So there are often sponsored candidates who come through a track like that with either a consulting firm or an investment bank. But then the main thing is that wherever you come from or whatever industry you come from, on your resume, there is progression evidence. So you might be able to show that through sort of a traditional promotional track. You might be someone who can show a lot of depth. So you may have worked with one company for a long time, but you've perhaps moved around within different functions within that organization. Or you might be somebody who has a breadth of experience. So you might have, you know, moved across several different industries and tried to experience new things. But I think the one thing that all admissions committees will look for is progress. So, you know, evidence of moving forwards in your career, leadership. So whether that's through line management, but a lot of younger MBA candidates haven't had that opportunity. But, you know, again, there are other ways to demonstrate that, whether it's by taking responsibility for different areas within your organization, or perhaps mentoring juniors or whatever it might be. But the thing that sort of stands out is that usually the resumes of successful MBA candidates will show that there has been thought and planning, and you know, there's a self-awareness about how their career has moved from the time they graduated through to their point of application, and people have been thoughtful and considered about the career decisions that they have made.
You're absolutely spot on, Emma. And just to bring in, you know, one anonymous, you know, attendee asked us, you know, is it okay to have an educational background? And then George, instead, one of our other attendees said, you know, do you need to reach a specific career level in order to be able to apply? And I think you've correctly just explained that it's showing the progression regardless of industry. So both to our anonymous attendee and to George, it's really showing what you've done thus far in order to be able to show a successful application. But Emma, Caroline, anything else that you'd like to add?
I think, sorry, go ahead, Emma.
No, just one very quick thing, just about experience level. So there's a wide range of experience, right? So people who are very early in their careers to people who have quite a lot more experience. So that idea of not having to reach a specific level, it's about what your goals are and how what you have done to the point of application will translate in combination with an MBA to those goals that you outline in your essays. And as long as you can prove that, it's not about a sort of set experience level. Sorry, Caroline.
I was just going to say that the admissions committee is looking for diversity. So in some ways, you know, the question that we have on the screen is a bit of a trick question, because there is no such thing as the right background, right? They're looking for diversity, and they're looking for people from a lot of different backgrounds. And sometimes we speak with candidates who feel that because they don't have the typical pre-MBA background, they're not a management consultant, they're not an investment banker, etc., they think they're at a disadvantage. And actually, it's often quite the contrary, right? If you have some unusual work experience, that can really help you to stand out. So what the schools are looking for is, you know, what you have achieved, and whatever domain it is, what impact have you had? Because the perspective that they take is that your past performance is the best predictor of your future success. So whatever domain you're in and whatever stage of your career you're at, They're looking for that evidence of impact, of results, and of rapid progression.
So moving on to academics, which is always the big topic. So what are these schools looking for?
Sure. So I would say that, it's important to keep in mind that, that these schools are looking for strong academics, but they're taking a holistic perspective. So they are not going to look at your GPA or your GMAT or your GRE in isolation. So what they're looking for is evidence that you have good academic capacity, because the schools want to admit people who are going to succeed, right? They want people to come to the school and really thrive in the classroom, do well in their exams, and really be able to benefit from that academic experience. They don't want to be admitting people who are going to struggle academically. So to demonstrate that you have that capacity, they're going to be looking at a number of elements. And you don't have to be outstanding on all of them, but you do have to be, meet a certain threshold in some of those dimensions. So the schools will be looking at your undergraduate degree. So they'll be looking at the institution where you studied. The schools have an incredible knowledge of educational institutions around the world. So they have an understanding of, which are the top schools in different markets. They will give a certain weighting to the top schools. So they'll be looking at where you've studied, what you've studied. They'll be looking at your GPA, and they'll also be scrutinizing your transcript. So they'll be looking at, how you did throughout the program, what grades you got, especially if you took some quantitative courses. The quants are always important for business school, and they'll be looking at how you did on those parts of your undergrad. And then if you have a master's program, great, they'll also be looking at the same elements. And then, of course, there's the GMAT or the GRE. So the schools are pretty agnostic on the test, but you do need to show that ideally, you've met a certain level. So the average scores at these schools are typically in the low 700s. The range is much broader than that. At INSEAD, they say they like to see a threshold of around sort of 70th or 75th percentile or above on both the quant and the verbal. There is some flexibility there, but INSEAD can actually be less flexible than some other schools because, as I mentioned, it's that 1-year format. It is very intense. The pace is fast. You'll have exams every 8 weeks. There's no time really to sort of have a leisurely start, and there's not much time to catch up if you get behind. So INSEAD can be less flexible sometimes on academic criteria than other top schools. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you do have concerns, sometimes, candidates are concerned that their undergraduate track record wasn't great. Maybe they had some issue during those years, or maybe they just, weren't mature enough to take their studies that seriously, and they were just busy with all the other extracurriculars on campus and so on. That does happen, and obviously you can't go back and change that. But what you can do is compensate for that with a strong performance in the GMAT or the GRE. And likewise, if you're concerned that your GMAT or your GRE is a little bit borderline, then that's, if you have a really strong undergraduate track record, then that can help to compensate for that. So they are taking that holistic perspective. But as I said, it is important. You're applying to an academic program. At INSEAD, the admissions committee is composed half alumni, half faculty. And the faculty want to make sure that they're getting, really smart students in their classroom. So they do care a lot about the academic profile of candidates. Emma, anything to add from the LBS perspective?
I guess the only thing I would say is that when you are completing your application, as you're saying, there are often places where you can explain if you've not performed, as well as you would have wanted in your undergraduate degree. But also, I think just a sort of caveat on the whole GMAT thing, as this, as we see the scores kind of climb at all the different schools, is that you need to be aware that some institutions, banks and consulting firms, particularly when they recruit, are looking at looking for a specific cutoff for GMAT. So admissions committee will be looking to see that your career goals are kind of in alignment with your academics and GMAT score. So for example, if you want to go and work for an MBB firm, so McKinsey, Bain or BCG, you are going to need to demonstrate in your application some very, very strong academics and a strong GMAT score, because those companies just use the GMAT as a cutoff in terms of who they look to interview. So I think it's quite important to remember that when you're applying, that you really want to align those career goals with your sort of academic performance. But yeah, other than that, LBS looking for very similar things as INSEAD. One more thing, I guess, GMAT, GRE, they're probably a little bit more accommodating of the GRE than INSEAD. Caroline, I think that's still probably the case, isn't it?
Yeah, so whereas INSEAD says, ideally about sort of 70th percentile or above on the GMAT, they're looking for about 80th percentile or above on the GRE.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so everyone, I know we don't often cover this even in our initial calls. We always talk about the academics and the professional background, but one part that we often don't speak about that is instead crucial to the application is actually the extracurriculars. So we have a lot of candidates that come through, and I've seen many firsthand with, great professional backgrounds, great educational backgrounds, yet all they have done is that. There is nothing else that catches your eye from an extracurricular standpoint. So let's talk now a bit, like, what are these schools really looking for from an extracurricular standpoint?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because, we see so many clients come through who think that really what matters only is good academics and a strong professional background. And for sure, that is a really, really important part of the application process. But schools aren't just interested in those things. They are interested in your holistic profile, as Caroline was saying before. So, what else is it that you bring to an MBA program? And one of the best ways that you can demonstrate that is through your extracurricular involvement. So often the things that you do outside work and outside your academics are the kind of things that will sort of show who you are as a person, what your motivations are and what drives you to succeed. What are you passionate about? What really kind of lights you up inside? And extracurriculars and being able to demonstrate and highlight these either on your resume or also, for example, in the LBS application, there's a 400-word mini essay which asks you about your involvement in these activities, is a really, really important part of the application process. In terms of what you do and what you include, I think the really key thing is to make sure that these activities are meaningful. So in a similar way that Caroline was mentioning about, the impact that you've had in your professional life, you need to have shown or demonstrated impact in your extracurriculars. So whether you are involved in sort of volunteering, whether you are playing sport to a high level or whatever it is, you need to have demonstrated that you have had some kind of concrete impact. Certainly, at the bottom of a resume, you can often put down just your sort of general hobbies or interests, if you like, but being able to put some really sort of interesting extracurriculars that show where you might have led an event or captained a team or traveled abroad to work for Habitat for Humanity or whatever it is, will really add value and add weight to your sort of profile. So, for example, this year I've had a younger client, actually an early career applicant who was applying to a Masters in Management program. And she had been responsible for running the whole TEDx talks and conference at her undergraduate institution. And that was such a great thing for her to be able to put on her resume, because it showed that she had run a major event. It showed that she had managed a large team. She had worked with quite a substantial budget for that. And she had managed year on year to, even in a pandemic, to increase the number of attendees at the event. So all of those things gave a really good insight into her ability to work with others, to lead, and all of those kind of softer things that MBA programs are looking for. But I think the other thing is that sort of certainly at LBS, they want to know that you're going to engage in the community. It's not just about what you do in the classroom and how you perform in your exams, even those things are really important, but it's, are you a fun person with a good sense of humour? Are you going to get involved in different clubs? Are you going to be someone who really loves tattoo, which is the big cultural festival that they have on campus, pandemic situations allowing? You know, are you going to go and represent the school at MBAT? You know, so all of these things really do add up, and it is something that schools take note of and put, you know, great weight on in terms of just looking at how you're going to fit into the school community.
And I think that's also what makes candidates interesting. And at least this was my perspective, especially INSEAD, that has a lot of space on where you can put extracurriculars. I think even more than LBS has specific fields where they even ask you to speak about that. I think this is really what makes the candidates stand out. But Caroline, and I know this question came also from an attendee, what was your perspective with INSEAD? I mean, is extracurricular really what makes a candidate pop or not?
Well, it can be, but there are lots of different things that can make a candidate pop. So it doesn't have to be extracurriculars, but it is important, right? I mean, as Emma said, they're looking to see if a candidate is, you know, a well-rounded individual who will contribute to the program and not just come to the school, you know, for the academic experience and then to land a great job afterwards. Because, you know, business school, probably more than any other graduate program, is about the community, right? And building those relationships and building that network. And, you know, partly that happens in the classroom, but actually probably much more than the classroom. You know, it happens outside of the classroom and all of the other things that are going on. So the schools are very keen to attract people who will embrace those opportunities. And, you know, sometimes get questions from candidates who are concerned that, you know, the schools are looking for a very specific type of extracurricular, right? You know, do I have to have excelled in sports, or do I have to have, you know, done a lot of fundraising, or, you know, work for charity? They think that, you know, maybe there's some specific extracurricular that is better than something else. And it's really not about anything in particular, right? It's absolutely what is important to you. There's no particular extracurricular that carries more weight than anything else. It's more about, you know, the how you've got engaged, what you've done, what impact you've had, what you've achieved, and is it something that you really care about? And you know, they also like to see a track record in your extracurriculars over time. That it's not something that you just, you know, took up 6 months before the application deadline. It looks a bit suspicious that it was for the purpose of your MBA application. So, you know, they like to see that track record over time. And for some candidates, you know, especially early career candidates, that can be, as Emma said, you know, an area where it can help them to stand out in a situation where perhaps they don't have a huge amount of professional experience. Perhaps they have some amazing extracurriculars that can help them to stand out. So in that case, you know, it can really help an application pop, as you say, Bea. But for other candidates, you know, they may have some solid extracurriculars, but nothing, you know, particularly remarkable, but they stand out because of their, you know, extraordinary professional achievements and their academics. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to be extraordinary on every dimension, but it's about, you know, showing that you're a balanced candidate and looking to shine at least in one particular dimension.
Agreed. And so let's move on to kind of nearly the final part of the discussion. So what are the top tips for an INSEAD application?
Okay, well, I'll jump in there. So I would say that, you know, it's important to take some time before you start working on the application to really reflect on your career path, reflect on, you know, what has made you the person that you are today, what has shaped you as an individual. Because the application is quite long and I have to take some responsibility for that. There are several questions you have to respond to, and it can look quite daunting. The good thing about having a long application is that it really gives you the opportunity to tell your story in multiple dimensions. And sometimes, you know, we work with clients who are applying to INSEAD and LBS and other international schools, as well as the US schools. And often the US schools have shorter applications. And so, you know, that can seem more appealing. But at the end of the day, sometimes the candidates feel happier with their applications for INSEAD, London Business School, because they feel that they've had the opportunity to to tell more of their story, and they feel proud of the multiple elements that they've been able to get across to the school, which is sometimes more difficult in a very short application. So do take advantage of that space, but don't just dive into writing your application straight away, and think carefully about things like, your motivation for applying to business school. Think carefully about your career goals. Think about that logical thread, right? If you are looking to make a career change, it's important to think about, what are the transferable skills that you've developed in your career, in your life to date, that will be useful for your future career and interesting for a future recruiter. So all of that reflection is a great foundation, and that's something that we do at the start of the process when we start working with our clients, is to take them through this deep reflection process to really sort of set the foundation for the application before diving into writing anything. And then I would say that a mistake or something that I think is a shame in some applications that I've seen is that candidates focus too much on the professional story, because they think that the school's really just interested in the professional track record and the academic track record, but that's not the case. They really want to get to know you as an individual. They want to know your personal story. They want to understand your values, your motivation, what makes you tick. And so there are opportunities to weave that into the application. And so do take advantage of that. And sometimes candidates are not sure, is this relevant to my application? It may be that they went through some particularly challenging period in their life. It could be even going back to childhood, and that could have had a big impact on what inspired them and what sort of triggered the path that they followed. And candidates can sometimes be concerned that it's not strictly relevant to their MBA application. And I would encourage you to be to really strike a balance in your application between your professional story and your personal story, because the school is absolutely interested in both. And if you're able to give them a broader sense of who you are, you'll probably really pique their interest, and they'll want to learn more about you. And how will they learn more about you? It will be when they invite you to interview, and that's what you want to do. Is you want to trigger that interest to take you to the next stage. So I would say, encourage you to think about how you can strike that balance between those parts of your story. And then it's important to as you said, take some time to take stock up front, and then take time for the application, because it's not something that you can knock out overnight. Most people go through multiple iterations of their application, and there are several parts, right? There's the application form, there's the CV, there are the essays. You also have to, you should be working closely with your recommenders, because it's important that what they say is really complementary to how you're presenting yourself in your application. So, give yourself the benefit of some time, because I'm sure that, most of you are incredibly busy individuals who are juggling a busy day job with trying to also work on your MBA application. So do start well ahead of time, so that you're not in a rush at the last minute. And then I would say, another part of the INSEAD application, of course, is the video questions that you submit around the time of the application deadline. And you have a short window when you need to submit those. And sometimes candidates sort of get caught up so much in the written application that they don't really think about those video questions, and they can be a little bit taken by surprise by those. So do carve out some time to prepare for those. And you won't know the questions ahead of time that they're going to ask you in that exercise, but you can definitely practice. And practice does help to make perfect, right? So that practice will be useful, especially with sort of managing the time limit that you have with responding to those questions, which is very short. You have 60 seconds to respond to each question. That goes very quickly. So definitely encourage you to dedicate some time to that as well.
I agree. And, everyone, please do make sure, especially on the unique aspect, there is no stamp on exactly who you need to be. They really need to get to know you. So, just to reemphasize again what Caroline said in the middle before, do really show life events, things that have changed you. They are indeed important. But let's move to LBS. And so there's two questions, Emma, that we're actually going to go through today. So your top tips for LBS as a whole. And then one of our anonymous attendees asked something that we often get questioned on, which is, at INSEAD, obviously you need the languages. How important is it to know more than one language at LBS?
Okay, let's start with that one first. So unless they have changed again, so back in the day when I was there, LBS did ask you to have a second language to, I think it was level 2, slightly random level system, by the time you graduated. And, you know, because it is a very global school, it was something that we thought was important. You know, I'm a bit of a monoglot coming from New Zealand, so stuck out on the edge of the world. So my languages are limited. I have very basic Japanese, but not much else. But it was seen as something that was very important, as, you know, sort of showcasing, I guess, the global nature of the school and encouraging people to learn about other cultures through the language, and obviously all the sort of depth and richness that brings. It did, however, cause large drama for a large number of our sort of cohort, people who had come from Britain. People on our little isles don't often tend to learn additional languages, although it is, I'm pleased to say, increasing massively through the school system. So they, I think, correct in saying that it is still the same, dropped the formal requirement, but there is still the option to learn languages. So if you want to, and when you join LBS, you can still take languages like Russian, Spanish, German, what else is there? Yeah, Japanese, Italian, German, French, and those are available as electives through King's College London. So it's an affiliated college of the University of London. So so it's more of a nice to have, not always a need to have at LBS in the same way that it is at INSEAD. In terms of top tips, so pretty much everything that Caroline said, although the video interview is slightly different at LBS because it is after the invitation to interview is made, so you don't have to do it pre-submission of your application. I think one of the things that is really interesting about LBS is this kind of strap line that you'll see plastered all over the website now, which is this idea of minds alive. And these are the kind of the things and the traits that LBS believes will set eventually thriving businesses apart from failing businesses. So this idea of what I call the 3 C's, so curiosity, creativity, and collaborativeness. And those kind of key traits are some of the things that the LBS admissions team is looking for in its successful candidates when it's looking for it to bring in its class each year. So if you can kind of keep those things, those personal traits in the back of your mind when you're pulling your application together, you will go quite a long way to demonstrating the examples and the experience that will align with what the admissions committees are looking for. So yeah, so curiosity, creativity, and collaborativeness are really important things for the LBS application. And one other thing that we haven't sort of really talked about much so far is outreach. So, you know, network, and there's no excuse, you know, even in the middle of a pandemic, for not doing sort of your due diligence now and reaching out to students, to alum, obviously in a respectful way that's understanding of people's time commitments. But, you know, you have social media platforms like LinkedIn. Every business school out there offers a huge range of webinars, of coffee chats, of online campus tours. So really reaching out, really connecting with the school that you are targeting. LBS has a huge number of information events online. Hopefully by the end of the year, they'll be able to return to doing their proper information sessions face-to-face and their drop-in sessions that they have on campus every Monday and Friday. So really, you know, taking the time to get to know the school and to understand the culture there, and to have those conversations and ask current students, student ambassadors, ask alumni that you know what their experiences have been like at the school. And the more you network and the more you reach out and have those conversations and engage with people, the more you will be able to understand what the school is looking for and how your own profile fits in line with what the school is looking for when it fills its class. And without fail, all the clients I've had, I always encourage them to do, outreach right from the start of the application process, right from when we start working together. One of the first things we talk about, along with recommenders, and getting them on board early. But yeah, it's a really important part of the process. And without fail, my clients find that LBS alum and students, as I'm sure they are INSEAD, are just very generous with their time, and they're happy and willing to share their experiences and talk to people and encourage them to become part of the community. So that's a really important part of it. And other than that, identify what makes you global. And as we talked about earlier, it might not be the obvious things. You might not have had those advantages where you can travel and work in different areas or study abroad, but find out what it is, how you can hook yourself into the idea of global culture and global understanding. And that will stand you in very good stead throughout the application process.
Thanks, Emma. And so we're actually going to the last question of the day. So Caroline, I'll address this one to you. So what to expect at interview stage and how to prepare?
Yeah, so I'll talk a bit about the INSEAD interview, but LBS is has some different specificity. So I'll pass on to Emma when I'm done. But I would say that it's important to be aware at INSEAD that you'll have 2 interviews with alumni. The school will try to match you with one alum who has a somewhat similar background to you, one who has a different background, and you may well have one alum who's a fairly recent grad and one who is a more senior grad. So that's typically how they try to plan things out, although, it also does depend on alumni availability. So it doesn't always work out like that. And the alumni are, involved in the process because it's an opportunity for the school to get input from someone in your local market. So given this incredible diversity of the INSEAD admissions pool, it can sometimes be difficult for the admissions committee to gauge, okay, so this person from Korea has achieved this in this time frame versus someone from Brazil who's achieved that in a similar career in this time frame, and how does that compare? And so because of that diversity of in the pool, it's helpful for the school to get that local input, that local market input. So that's partly why the alumni are involved at the interview stage. So you'll have 2 separate meetings. In former times, of course, it was in person, and now interviews are on Zoom, and eventually things may go back to more in-person interviews, but possibly it'll still be a mix. And the alumni have to give feedback to the school on some specific data points. So what they will ask you about, and quite predictable questions. So they'll be asking you about, what you've achieved in your career, why you've chosen to pursue that particular path. They'll be probing your career goals, right? In your INSEAD application, there's quite a short section where you can write about your career goals. And so you should be prepared at the interview stage to really expand on that and talk more about, your short-term goals, your longer-term goals, and the research that you've done to show some understanding of the path that you'll be following and how you're going to, especially if you're looking to make a career change, how you're going to make that happen. So it's important to think about preparing that discussion, because you might not have gone into a lot of detail on that at the written application stage. They will be looking to get a sense for whether you're a well-rounded individual who will contribute to the life of the campus beyond the classroom. So they will ask questions about your interests outside of work and study. And they'll also be giving feedback to the school on your interpersonal skills, your communication skills, their impressions of your personality overall. So a lot of the questions will be typical MBA interview questions. So, you can definitely prepare for it. You may get some questions from sort of left field. So just be prepared to have something unexpected come up and show that you can think on your feet. And then, the school does like to ask some behavioral questions. So that may come up, asking for examples of when you've demonstrated a particular behavior. So it may be, for example, asking, when have you had to convince someone to do something they didn't want to do, or when have you had to, manage a difficult relationship with a colleague? So sort of drilling down into specific examples of experiences, and that can also come up at the video question stage as well. And I would say also it's important to, do a bit of research ahead of your interviews to learn about who you'll be meeting with. Now with LinkedIn and so on, it's pretty easy to find out some background information about the alumni that you'll be meeting with. So do that research ahead of time and see if you can establish some point in common. That could be a great icebreaker if you see that you have some commonality in your career path or your educational background or your interests. That's great to identify that, so you can sort of make that connection at the start of your discussion. And then also think about the questions that you're going to ask your alumni, your interviewers. So people normally love to talk about their own experience, right? So it's always a good idea to ask them about their own experience at the school. And so, they want to see that you are genuinely interested in attending the school, in getting to know the alumni, in engaging with the network. So, do think about how you can demonstrate that interest as well through the questions. So, Emma, you want to say a few words about the format at LBS?
Yeah, sure. So,
yeah, Emma, it'd be great to get a brief overview in the last 2 minutes of any additional points that you think are specific to LBS.
Yeah, so as I said, the video interview comes after your invitation to interview. So what is different to INSEAD is that the first question is set and the second is random. So from an ideas bank, so question bank. So that you really do have to prepare quite carefully for that set question. And then, as Caroline said, practice. The interview, there is one alum who will have access to your entire application form, resume, recommendations. That's different from a lot of US schools in particular. Generally matched with someone from a similar industry to you, if at all possible. Not always the case, because the school interviews all over the world, but they do try and do that. The questions similar, why MBA, why LBS? So really important to kind of show your passion for school, let your personality come through, because this is the first time that they've seen you. They really want to know that you are going to be a good representative of their brand if it's an alum, as it's an alum that's interviewing you. The other thing that is specifically different is that LBS has what started out when I was there as a kind of a little presentation, 5-minute presentation. It's now called a case study, or it has become known as a sort of mini case study. And that is where the alum will give you a question, pose a question to you. You have 5 minutes to prepare it. And then you're given 5 minutes to present your ideas. So a lot of my clients get really quite sort of freaked out about that in advance, and they get panicky and think, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? But really what LBS and what the team at LBS is looking for there is an ability to structure your thoughts, to think on your feet, to deliver your presentation with flair and with charisma. So not somebody that's going to panic and get flustered if it's something that they don't know about. So, being able to hold your own, so that they know that as you progress through your career and when you have to present to a board or whatever the situation may be, that you can really, have impact and make sure that you maintain that composure. So that's something with the LBS interview process that's a little bit different from INSEAD, and something that I work on quite closely with my clients when we do mocks, because often it's something that strikes fear. But other than that, similar kinds of questions, behavioral questions. One thing I would say is that, just think about structure when you're being interviewed. It's really important that whatever you have to say, it's clearly structured, so that you're not making your interviewer work too hard in terms of trying to listen, trying to work out where your thought processes are going, because that's something that you will be marked on by your interviewer. Just trying to think if there's anything else, Caroline. I think that's probably the main differences between the two.
I think you've got it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the structured approach then at the end. So I wanted, just as we come to the end, wanted to thank you both, Emma and Caroline. And I know that throughout the hour, we've kind of incorporated the questions from all the attendees, at least the main ones. So just for everyone on the call and anyone that then listens after to the recording, if you have any questions that have been unanswered, on INSEAD or LBS or on the other schools that we're talking about in these weekly master classes, like, please do sign up to a free consult. We'll be able to, and send us your CV as well on that. We'll be able to look through your CV and we'll be able to have, a 30-minute in-depth chat specific to your profile. Thank you everyone again, and hopefully see you at the next weekly call. Have a lovely day.